and making the right choice about what you put in Slack, what you send in an email, what you put on WhatsApp. And I think people not just need to learn, but need to be curious about the consequences of choosing a particular tool and which works best in their circumstances.
Well, I have to ask you, how do you do that? How do people learn?
By being aware of the consequences, in the sense that, and again, you learn this through things like blogging for donkey's years. What gets a response? What gets the right response? What gets sometimes too fast a response? So if you bang stuff out on Messenger and you get a welter of unconsidered Me Too responses to something that you maybe wanted a more considered reaction to, then stick it in email or choose some other tool that's got a slower rhythm to it. And again, I think in terms of corporate communications, a lot of senior people have had the channels of communication. They've had the internal newsletters, they've had the internal video channels in some cases, but they've not really had any connection back from the viewers or the listeners. It's not been a two-way thing. So, they, I think in many cases, fear a loss of control with this sudden expansion of potential. But I often make the point they didn't have control in the first place. They had the channels, they could make the statements, they could push the stuff out. But what the consequences of that were, or how many people listened, or how many people saw and reacted, was something that they didn't have to worry about or think about. So again, I think that learning curve, and also again with blogging, you don't want to end up just writing things that people are going to respond to or like.
Yep.
Sometimes you have to be brave and write the thing that matters that may not get an immediate or visible response. But it is just being curious about the ecology, as I like to call it, of tools that are available. That's interesting.
So, I mean, as I was mentioning before we were in this formal conversation, as it were, we were chatting about learning by doing, which almost all the other guests have been doing or talking about. And it strikes me that that's actually the real core of your message from the very beginning was do stuff, try stuff, learn from it. And if we look at that frame of leadership, leadership being so critical to enable that in organizations. And so, just so interested in your reflections on that, and I suppose in particular, how do you get leaders to be curious, to experiment, to try these tools in ways that are going to make them work?
Well, I think part of it also relates to our start today, where you had some challenges with technology, and we had to, learn from that mistake. And that's as somebody who used to work in technology and broadcasting, that was the key principle. You learn from your mistakes. You try not to make them again. But I think a lot of people have a very nervous attitude to that, especially senior people, where they're meant to be. There's this perception that they're perfect and they don't make mistakes, and everything's managed and massaged so that they look as if they don't. But once you start, the phrase working out loud emerged out of this environment. Once you start being willing to think in a public space, say what you're noticing in a public space, be seen to deal with the reactions in a public space, that can feel very vulnerable if you've been used to controlling the message. But as you said rightly, the opportunities are enormous, because if you're courageous and brave, people see that. They trust you. They think, okay, this is somebody doing their best, trying to have the greatest impact that they can. We'll help them rather than mocking them for falling over.
Yeah, it strikes me that, there's obviously some aspects of leadership that are perennial, they're eternal. But one of the ones which really has come to the fore is this ability to be vulnerable. You have to be. Otherwise, you can't learn this stuff.
Well, and I think we're seeing this played out on a grand scale in terms of some of our political leaders and the different ways of dealing with the current challenges, and the degrees of honesty and openness about how difficult things are, and or pretending that they're okay. These are really, really, as the Chinese would appropriately say, interesting times in terms of leadership.